Introduction to the respiratory system. For the first test, I just want you to know two major functions of the respiratory system. Gas exchange, so that is the exchange of oxygen for carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide for oxygen. It's where you're going to take in the oxygen and exhale out the carbon dioxide. So the respiratory system helps remove carbon dioxide from the blood, but put oxygen in the blood. And the other function I want you to know is that the respiratory system is the prime player in maintaining a constant blood pH. So what that means is like the acid base component of the blood. So always, always, always the blood has to be between 7.35 and 7.45. And so what you need to remember is that carbon dioxide makes the blood acidic. And so if the blood starts becoming acidic, then the respiratory system is going to help exhale and remove the carbon dioxide from the blood. So it does play a huge role in maintaining constant blood pH. Now the opening to the nose here, these two little your openings to your nostrils are the external nares. And when you move into the nasal cavity, we have these three bones here. This little bones extensions, and this bone here. This is the superior middle, and inferior turbinate, or superior middle inferior concha. And they create this little like channels that when you breathe through your nose, the air has to flow through this little tunnels, these channels, flow over a mucous membrane, get cleaned, get humidified, warmed, so this is why it's so much better to breathe through your nose, because air is having to travel through these little tunnels, these little air channels, and it's going to clean and humidify and warm the air. Now, at the back of the nose, there's two little openings. Just like you have these two little openings in the front of your nostrils, there's two little openings at the back, and those are going to be called the internal nares. So the openings right here that go from the nasal cavity to your nasopharynx, that's going to be the internal nares. Now, down the middle of the nasal cavity, there is this two bones here, and they make up what is called the nasal septum. So the nasal septum separates your right side of the nasal cavity from the left side of the nasal cavity. And these are the bones, the bone extensions, the bony parts that make those air channels. So this is going to be the superior middle inferior turbinate, or superior middle inferior concha. And this structure right here is your nasal septum, which is kind of like this bone, and then there's a bone on the bottom, and they join, they meet to make up the nasal septum. Nasal septum, and then you have your turbinates, or concha, superior middle inferior. Okay, what is the name of the opening at number 1? What is the name of the opening at number 2? And what is all of this space right here? What is all this space called? That is going to be the nasal cavity, and it is lined with mucous membrane. From the pharynx, we go nasopharynx, oropharynx, laryngopharynx, laryngopharynx is going to enter the larynx through this opening, which is called the glottis. So moving into the larynx, you are going to go through the glottis. This structure is the epiglottis. And whenever you swallow, the larynx moves up and the epiglottis closes it so that food does not go down your larynx and down into your lungs. So food needs to go down this direction, which is the esophagus. So this is the laryngopharynx. And you have here in the laryngopharynx, you have the opening to the larynx and you have the opening to the esophagus. So there's like this opening and that opening. This way is supposed to just be air moving in and out. And most of the time the larynx is open. Your epiglottis is open because most of the time you're breathing. So it only closes whenever you swallow. Now, it's this little flap of epiglottis doesn't just like fold down and close off the glottis. What happens is when you swallow, the larynx moves up and the larynx moves, here's your epiglottis, the larynx moves up and then it closes. So it goes like this. The larynx actually moves up instead of going like this. It doesn't do this. It goes like this. So let me wash my larynx when I swallow. Do you see that whole thing move? It goes up. So the larynx moves up and the epiglottis closes. That's when you swallow. So that the coffee doesn't go down the wrong way. So most of the time this is open and this is kind of like closed. This is leaning up against, this leans up against that pharynx there, and it's kind of like the esophagus is really closed. But when you swallow, this whole thing moves up over here and that opens up well, I call this opening the gullet. Like when you eat, it's like put it down the gullet. So it'll open up your gullet so that the food will go down the esophagus. Now, the larynx, we said the opening is the glottis, this structure is the epiglottis, then we have the vocal cords, which is right here, that we have these muscles that can change the size, make them loose, make them tight, to have like a high voice, or they're really loose when you have like a low voice. And so there's muscles that that move those vocal cords so you can have different pitches. And then this cartilage right here is the thyroid cartilage. Now this one is a different one. So this one back here comes all the way around and it's here. And it makes a whole, like a circle, like a ring. That is the cricoid cartilage. That is not the thyroid. This one is the thyroid cartilage, and that's the one that you can see it. It's big and bulky, and in some men it's called the Adam's apple because it's so big and bulky. That's the thyroid cartilage. And then this bone is the floating bone in the neck that helps form the larynx. Do you remember that bone? What is the name of that bone, that floating bone in the neck? What's the name of it? That was from a video from a long time ago. The introduction to the skeletal system. So this model right here is a model of the larynx. It's a giant model of a larynx. And this is the back, this is the front. So this right here is the thyroid cartilage. I hope you were able to tell me that this was the hyoid bone. This funky structure looks like a tongue almost. That is the epiglottis. That is going to help. It's like a flap that will close off your larynx when you swallow. This is the back of your larynx. So all this cartilage up here is the thyroid cartilage. The opening allowing air to go into your larynx is going to be the glottis, and that flap right there is the epiglottis. and you can barely see it right here. This creamy structure in here, those are the vocal cords that they can get really tight or they can loosen. So you have muscles that can control those, so you can change the pitch to high or low. So the whole thing is the larynx. The opening is the glottis. What is the name of this structure here and here that closes the glottis when you swallow? It's going to be the epiglottis. You have the vocal cords, and then this cartilage, which is the thyroid cartilage. All right, so let's review all those parts right now. Pause the video and answer these questions before continuing. You know, this is just really good practice for you. Just, you know, this is what you need. You need to know these things for the lab practical. Okay, so all of this I consider to be your upper respiratory tract. You have the larynx here. You have the trachea. You have your bronchus. This is the right bronchus, this is the left bronchus. And then the primary bronchioles, and then the secondary bronchioles, and the tertiary bronchioles. And I refer to it as the upper respiratory tract, but I guess it would probably be more accurate to refer to it as the conduction zone. So this is the area that the air is just traveling down to the lower respiratory tract, where you're going to have gas exchange. So when the air is traveling through your larynx, trachea, bronchi, right and left bronchus, this primary, secondary, tertiary, terminal bronchioles, it's just traveling. It's just traveling through those air passageways. It's getting cleaned. And then eventually it's going to get down to the very bottom, deep down into your alveoli, and that is where the actual gas exchange occurs. So this entire upper respiratory tract is really referred to as your conduction zone. Okay, this model has a lot of stuff here. Okay, we have the trachea. We have the right bronchus, the left bronchus, that branches into your primary bronchioles here. I guess this is a primary bronchiole, this is a primary bronchiole. Those could be secondary bronchioles. Behind the trachea, you have the esophagus. So this structure is that 12-inch passageway that takes the food down to the stomach. So there's supposed to be a stomach right here, but this is the esophagus. And what is this muscle? This dome-shaped muscle is the diaphragm. It plays a huge role. It's called diaphragmatic breathing. Right now, while it's in the dome shape, that would be, it's in that form, that position when you're exhaling, and then it inverts and makes like a bowl whenever you're inhaling. So right now this is like exhalation. Okay, we already did the cardiovascular system, so you should know that this is your pulmonary aorta. No, that's not the pulmonary aorta. This is the superior vena cava. I have pulmonary aorta. That is wrong. I need to fix that. This is, let me fix that right now. Okay, magically I fixed it. Okay, so we have here the superior vena cava. This is your systemic aorta, or the great aorta. And we do not see the pulmonary aorta because that's like, you would see it if you were like, if the heart were there. Now, these blood vessels that are going to the lungs and from the lungs, so this is the ones that are going to the lungs to go get oxygen. So that's going to be the pulmonary arteries. And these are taking the oxygenated blood back to the heart. So this is the pulmonary veins. So you see all of this stuff that I can ask you from a model. So when I have been teaching it by the system, but like the half head, for example, I can ask you questions from digestive system, respiratory system, nervous system, endocrine system. So when you look at a model, you have to look at the whole model and be like, oh my goodness, what all could she ask me from that model? So this is just kind of like an example. What was the name of the membrane, that serous membrane that surrounds the lungs, creates that friction-free environment? So every time that the lungs inflate and deflate, that lung tissue, which is actually very fragile, very delicate, doesn't, rub up against something and get rubbed raw, because of friction. Instead, your lungs inflate and deflate like in a sack of water. So that is called the pleura. And the layer that is attached to the organ is the visceral pleura, and when it's not attached to the lung is the parietal pleura, and between them in the pleural cavity is the serous fluid. So it's like your lungs are inflating, deflating in a sack of water. This is going to be the trachea, right bronchus, left bronchus. And you have your primary bronchioles, and then the secondary bronchioles from there. So this is going to be primary bronchiole and then secondary bronchiole, and it keeps branching. This is Anna. This is her trachea. This is 10 would be her right bronchus, her left bronchus. These would be primary bronchioles. This organ here is going to be her left lung. This passageway behind the trachea, the esophagus. Okay, that right there is the esophagus. What is this blood vessel here, and what are these blood vessels? Now, when you're going to and from the lungs, the blue one, which one is that one? Which one is that? Is that going to be the pulmonary artery or the pulmonary vein? Tricky. This one is the pulmonary artery. It's taking the blood to the lungs to go get oxygen. And the pulmonary veins are bringing that oxygen back to the heart. So veins bring blood to the heart. So these are pulmonary veins. They're bringing oxygen back to the heart. Pulmonary veins. So trachea, the right and left bronchus, primary bronchiole, esophagus, the left lung, left pulmonary artery, and then left pulmonary veins. Okay, we're going to try this document camera. I'm going to draw, and you need to be drawing as well in your notes. Okay, when I draw things, it's because I want you to also draw it. Okay, it's a type of learning where it's a physical active learning, so just trust me and draw it. So we're going to start with the larynx up here. There's that thyroid cartilage. Here's that hyoid bone there. So this is the larynx. Let's see if I can. This is my first attempt at document camera, so bear with me. And then we have the trachea, which has those C-shaped cartilages. And we have the right and left bronchus. This is, so the trachea bifurcates. And then it continues to branch or bifurcate and get smaller and smaller. So it just keeps branching and branching. So this first branches here are going to be your primary bronchioles. Primary bronchioles. And so this is a primary bronchiole, and these are primary bronchioles here. And then these branch or bifurcate into the secondary bronchioles. And then from secondary, you're going to bifurcate, branch into tertiary bronchioles. So it just keeps getting like smaller and smaller. And then from tertiary, it's going to bifurcate into terminal bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles. Okay, now you need to get a different color. Okay, I do have. So I'm going to try to see if blue doesn't show up, I'll use this, maybe I'll use pink. From terminal, it's going to branch into these respiratory bronchioles. Okay, so it branches into respiratory. These are the respiratory bronchioles, all of these. And then from respiratory, it either just turns into an alveolar duct, or it branches to give rise to alveolar duct. So once you start seeing these alveoli, okay, one of these little structure is an alveolus, okay, one of these little bubbles. And when you have a sac of 3 or more, that is an alveolar sac. Okay, when you have greater than or equal to 3 alveoli. So alveoli is the plural form. That's when you have more than one. And so this passageway that has these alveoli, this passageway here and here, is an alveolar duct. Okay, so we have our upper respiratory tract, which is the conduction zone, where you're just conducting air. Air is just traveling from larynx, trachea, right bronchus, left bronchus, bronchi, to primary bronchiole, secondary bronchiole, tertiary bronchiole, terminal bronchiole. and it's just traveling. So the conduction zone, I refer to it as upper respiratory tract, okay? Conduction zone is pseudo-stratified, ciliated, columnar epithelium. That is the epithelium that has the cilia that beat 9 times a second. It's kind of like arranged in such a way so it's big, and then it looks like it's stratified, but really and truly, it looks stratified, but really and truly it is just one layer. It's simple. And that is cleaning the air, okay? These cilia, they beat 9 times a second. They clean out the mucus, that dirty old mucus that traps the bacteria. But down here in the respiratory bronchiole and the alveolar ducts, this is where you actually have gas exchange. So down here, this is actually called the respiration zone. Respiration zone. And this is where you're actually going to have gas exchange, where you're going to have the exchange of oxygen for carbon dioxide. And the tissue that makes up the that allows respiration is going to be the simple squamous epithelium. And remember, that's just one layer, that's just skinny flats, one layer of little skinny flat like scale-like cells. And that's going to allow the gas exchange. Okay, oxygen coming in, carbon dioxide coming out. Now, I hope you drew this, because this right here is going to be on the lab practical. Okay, I'm going to have this drawing, but instead of having it labeled, it'll say like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, X, Y, Z, K, L, M, N, O, P. Okay, so it'll be this drawing, my drawing, but it's going to be on your test, okay? This is a drawing I found. It's pretty good, but my drawing that I just drew for you right now, that you just drew in your notes, that's going to be the drawing that's going to be on the test. I don't think it's going to be this one. Okay, but anyway, like, let's pause the video and see if you would be able to name all of those structures. I would have said trachea, left bronchus, primary bronchiole, secondary bronchiole, tertiary bronchiole, terminal bronchiole. And now we're in that different zone, the respiration zone, where you have the simple squamous epithelium. So down here we have respiratory bronchiole, and then these passageways are going to be alveolar duct, and each one of these structures is an alveolus, and all of them are alveoli. So if you have like a sac of them, it's alveolar sac. So while this is the conduction zone, down here is the respiration zone. So this is going to be the respiratory bronchiole and then alveolar duct. So the alveolar duct has these alveoli. So 35, one is an alveolus, and all of them are alveoli. And then if you have a sac collection of 3 or more, like right here, 36, that would be alveolar sac. So the conduction zone, which is here, It is pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, and that is going to help. It's a mucous membrane. It's going to trap dust and bacteria and help clean the air before it gets down to this lower respiratory tract, down deep, deep, deep in your lung, where you actually have respiration, the gas exchange. And down there, it's simple squamous epithelium to allow for the gas exchange, for the gases to diffuse across the simple squamous and into the blood, into the capillaries. This is another model that I have of that respiration zone. These are the alveoli. What was the name of that membrane that surrounds your lungs to provide the friction-free environment? What's the name of that membrane right there? So this is going to be the pleura. And the layer that is attached is the visceral pleura. And this layer that is not attached is the parietal pleura. And between them is the serous fluid, water-like fluid that provides that friction-free environment. So it's like your lung is in a sack of water. So when it moves, it's not getting injured. It's not having this friction sores and getting damaged. So this is going to be terminal bronchiole, and that is still part of the the conduction zone. But then we have the respiratory bronchioles here, and then from there, the alveolar ducts. So the alveolar ducts give rise to the alveoli. So these passageways are alveolar ducts, and then they give rise to all these alveoli, these little bubble-like structures. And when you have 3 or more together as the alveolar sac, just one of the bubbles is an alveolus. Okay, so these, I believe the remaining slides are just review slides for you to review. And that is the respiratory system.